Baby eagle. Some of the world's most fascinating destinations have closed their doors to Americans in 2025. Whether it's politics, security, or simply no longer wanting American tourists, these countries have enforced strict bans. If you had plans to visit, you might want to rethink them. Here are 10 countries where Americans can no longer travel. Number 10. Afghanistan. Once an essential battleground in the global war on terror and later a stronghold for a U.S.-backed government, Afghanistan has become completely off-limits to American travelers. Since the Taliban's return to power in August 2021, the situation has deteriorated significantly. By 2025, the U.S. government has imposed a blanket ban on travel to Afghanistan, citing extreme risks including kidnappings, terrorist attacks, and the absence of any diplomatic protection. For Americans still residing in Afghanistan, the dangers are ever present. Foreigners, particularly from Western nations, are frequent targets of both the Taliban regime and various militant groups. Journalists and aid workers are often harassed, detained, or attacked, making it nearly impossible to operate in the country. Under Taliban rule, the safety of American citizens is in jeopardy, with the government no longer offering any sort of consular assistance. The security situation is compounded by neighboring countries that have heavily restricted their borders, leaving few escape routes should things take a turn for the worse. Incredibly, despite the escalating dangers, a small number of Americans continue to attempt entry into Afghanistan for purposes such as reporting, humanitarian work, or personal reasons. The hard truth, however, is that for those who go in, there is a significant risk they may never return. Number 9. Cuba. Cuba has long been a focal point of political tension between the U.S. and Cuba, but by 2025, the island nation has become practically off-limits to American travelers once again. After years of strained diplomatic relations and occasional attempts at thawing tensions, Cuba is once again under heavy scrutiny from the U.S. government. New restrictions have made it nearly impossible for average Americans to legally visit. Direct flights between the two nations have been sharply reduced, and tourist visas for Americans have been denied. Even Cuban Americans, who previously had easier access, now face more stringent entry requirements. The diplomatic battle between the two countries has reignited, with Cuba accusing the U.S. of economic sabotage, while the U.S. cites ongoing human rights violations, including violent crackdowns on protests. As a result, Americans can only travel to Cuba for specific, limited purposes such as journalism, academic research, or official government business. Any attempt to visit for leisure or tourism purposes is now considered illegal. Furthermore, Americans attempting to bypass these restrictions through third countries face serious consequences, including fines, interrogation, or even federal charges upon returning to the U.S. Traveling to Cuba has become more complicated than ever before, and for most, it's simply not worth the risk. Number 8. Eritrea. Eritrea, a small yet highly repressive nation in the Horn of Africa, has long been closed off to American travelers. Known as the North Korea of Africa due to its totalitarian government, Eritrea is one of the most politically restrictive and oppressive countries in the world. President Isaias Afwerki has ruled since the country's independence in 1993. And in that time, he has maintained an authoritarian regime with no democratic elections, no free press, and compulsory military service that can last indefinitely. Americans wishing to visit Eritrea are met with a closed door. The country has no U.S. embassy, meaning that Americans are entirely without consular protection should something go wrong. The Eritrean government has accused the U.S. of interfering in its internal affairs, and as a result, the government has stopped issuing visas to Americans entirely, including aid workers and journalists. For those brave enough to attempt entry, the reality is grim. Internet access is heavily restricted, and foreign media is not allowed to operate in the country. Locals face severe restrictions on movement, and foreign visitors are often closely monitored, followed, and sometimes detained without explanation. In a country where speaking out or even taking the wrong photograph could result in detention or worse, the risks are incredibly high. Despite these dangers, thousands of Eritreans risk their lives annually attempting to escape the country, and the situation is unlikely to improve anytime soon. With the regime's grip tightening and no diplomatic relations with the U.S., Americans are permanently banned from visiting this repressive nation. Number 7. Haiti. Haiti, once a destination renowned for its vibrant culture and beautiful beaches, has rapidly deteriorated into one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Following years of political instability, the country is now plagued by extreme violence, primarily driven by gang control. As of 2025, over 80% of Port-au-Prince, Haiti's capital, is under the control of violent gangs, leaving the government struggling to maintain any semblance of authority. The situation has reached catastrophic levels, with rampant kidnappings, violent street battles, and widespread lawlessness impacting daily life. For American travelers, the dangers are particularly acute, as gangs have been specifically targeting foreign nationals, particularly those with U.S. passports. Humanitarian workers have fled the country, and the U.S. Embassy has suspended most operations, advising all Americans to leave immediately. Airlines have canceled flights to Haiti, and even neighboring countries have tightened their borders to prevent Haitian refugees from fleeing. The U.S. government has issued a Level 4 Do Not Travel warning, urging Americans to avoid the country entirely. Given the ongoing instability, Haiti will remain off-limits to Americans for the foreseeable future. Number 6. Iran. Iran, with its breathtaking architecture, rich cultural history, and ancient civilization, has long been a perilous destination for American travelers. However, by 2025, it has escalated from a dangerous locale to one that is practically inaccessible to U.S. citizens. Iran's long-standing conflict with the United States has only worsened, culminating in the complete banning of American visitors. For years, Iran has used fabricated charges to arrest Americans, holding them as political pawns in diplomatic disputes. Despite the prior restrictions and extensive surveillance, by 2025, the country has fully banned U.S. citizens from entering. Even before this ban, obtaining a visa was challenging, and any traveler would face constant surveillance and likely be assigned a government minder throughout their visit. For dual citizens, the risks are even more severe, as Iran does not recognize dual nationality. Iranian Americans in particular have been targeted and detained without charges or trial. With no U.S. embassy or consular support in the country, any American caught in Iran is left completely without assistance. Unless there is a dramatic shift in diplomatic relations, Iran will remain off-limits to Americans for the foreseeable future. Number 5. Laos. Once celebrated as a tranquil and spiritual destination, Laos was known for its Buddhist temples, lush waterfalls, and the warm hospitality of its people. It attracted travelers seeking peace, culture, and natural beauty, offering a glimpse into a rich history filled with ancient ruins and vibrant landscapes. However, Laos has increasingly distanced itself from the West in recent years, creating an environment that has become increasingly closed off to American tourists. Geopolitically, the country has aligned itself more closely with China, leading to growing concerns about its political and economic independence. This shift has been accompanied by stricter domestic controls under the Communist Party, with the most significant development being the official ban on American tourists. The Laotian government justifies the ban with security concerns, though the deeper motive appears to be a form of retaliation. For years, the U.S. government has criticized Laos for its human rights record, particularly its restrictions on freedom of speech and its increasing reliance on China for both economic and political support. This criticism, combined with the evolving geopolitical landscape, has led the Laotian authorities to shut out American influence entirely. Travelers to Laos already faced challenges such as poor infrastructure, high crime rates, and limited accessibility. The ban now makes visiting the country even more difficult as Laos becomes a nation that actively seeks to avoid American presence. What was once considered a hidden gem, home to jungle-covered temples, mysterious villages, and a peaceful way of life, is now inaccessible to Americans. The country's historic treasures, which were once popular with travelers seeking an off-the-beaten-path experience, remain out of reach for the foreseeable future. Number 4. Myanmar, Burma. Myanmar, once a rising star in Southeast Asia's tourism industry, has rapidly descended into one of the most unstable and dangerous countries in the world. The coup in February 2021, led by the military junta, plunged the country into political chaos and violence, escalating into a devastating civil war. This conflict has resulted in widespread instability, with the military government engaging in brutal crackdowns against civilians and foreign nationals. The junta, which now controls the government, has particularly targeted Americans, viewing them as adversaries due to U.S. criticism of its human rights violations. Following the coup, the U.S. Embassy in Myanmar drastically reduced its operations, and reports of arbitrary arrests, kidnappings, and forced labor have become disturbingly common. Human rights organizations have raised grave concerns about the safety of foreigners in the country, particularly those who find themselves caught in the conflict zones. The instability in Myanmar has led to increasing hostility toward Western nations, and the military junta has actively cut ties with the West, instead aligning itself more closely with China and Russia. The junta has publicly accused the U.S. of supporting rebel groups and interfering in its internal affairs, further fueling its animosity toward American citizens. As a result, Myanmar has implemented a blanket ban on American citizens, leaving it an inaccessible and dangerous destination for U.S. nationals. The country is essentially a no-go zone for Americans, and with the ongoing conflict showing no signs of abating, it seems unlikely that safe travel to Myanmar will be possible in the near future. Unless a significant shift in the political landscape occurs and the military regime is overthrown or peace is restored, Myanmar will remain closed off to Americans. Number 3. North Korea. North Korea stands as one of the most isolated and repressive countries on Earth, and by 2025, it has become even more hostile to American visitors. For years, the country has been a mysterious and tightly controlled destination, but with rising tensions over its nuclear ambitions and increasingly strained relations with the West, North Korea has become even less accessible to foreigners, particularly Americans. In response to ongoing hostilities, the U.S. government has imposed a total travel ban on Americans wishing to visit North Korea, making it illegal to travel to the country without special permission, which is exceedingly rare. Even if permission were granted, visiting North Korea is fraught with extreme risks. Every movement is closely monitored by government agents, and any misstep could result in harsh punishment. For example, taking an unauthorized photo or speaking out of turn can lead to immediate imprisonment. Visitors are under constant surveillance, and there is no room for mistakes. Adding to the perilous nature of travel to North Korea is the absence of a U.S. embassy within the country. This lack of diplomatic presence means that Americans have no official way of seeking help in case of an emergency. The tragic case of Otto Warmbier, the American student who was arrested, imprisoned, and later died after being released from a North Korean prison, highlights the severe dangers involved in visiting the country. His death underscores the risks Americans face when dealing with North Korea's authoritarian regime. With rising nuclear tensions, ongoing hostilities, and the country's unyielding isolationist policies, Americans are now permanently banned from visiting North Korea. As the situation continues to escalate, this travel restriction seems unlikely to be lifted in the foreseeable future, leaving the country permanently off limits for U.S. citizens. Number 2. South Sudan. South Sudan, which gained independence in 2011, was once seen as a nation with immense potential. However, since then, the country has been ravaged by extreme instability. The hopes for a prosperous future have been overshadowed by civil war, violence, famine, and economic collapse. These challenges have created a perilous environment for foreign nationals, with Americans in particular being considered high-value targets for various militias and armed groups. The conflict and lawlessness have made South Sudan one of the most dangerous countries in the world for travelers. Kidnappings, shootings, and other forms of violence have become commonplace, and even aid workers and journalists have been killed while trying to help the people of the country. The capital, Juba, is considered highly unsafe, and the U.S. Embassy has been forced to evacuate its personnel due to the escalating dangers. With no reliable infrastructure, health care, or functioning government, South Sudan remains a no-go zone for Americans. In times of trouble, Americans face the grim reality of having little hope for assistance, as the country's fragile state makes any kind of rescue operation or diplomatic intervention almost impossible. The combination of extreme instability, ongoing violence, and lack of basic services makes South Sudan one of the most perilous places on earth for foreign nationals, and Americans in particular are strongly advised to avoid traveling there. Number 1. Syria. Once a stunning destination known for its ancient cities, rich culture, and breathtaking landscapes, Syria has been torn apart by civil war, terrorism, and foreign intervention since 2011. By 2025, it remains one of the deadliest places on earth, with terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda still active and operating in many areas. Americans are often targeted for kidnapping by these groups. The Assad regime also views Americans as enemies and has been known to arrest, torture, and execute travelers accused of espionage. With no functioning infrastructure, constant bombings, and widespread destruction, Syria remains highly dangerous. Even if peace were declared today, the country would still be incredibly challenging to visit, and for the foreseeable future, Syria is completely off-limits to Americans. From war zones and dictatorships to political retaliation, these countries have made one thing clear: the door is shut to American travelers. Were any of these a surprise to you? Do you think any of them will reopen their borders? Let us know in the comments, and before you go, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more eye-opening global travel updates. See you in the next one.